I still think there must have been a misunderstanding.
If it is not true, let Mr. Darcy contradict it himself. Till he does, I hope never to encounter him.
Despite the angsty rain-soaked confession and the unforgettable hand flags, Elizabeth and Darcy's attraction to one another is, from the outset, tinged with an underlying wariness, less a simple dislike than a set of mutual prejudices, most strongly held, it seems, by our main protagonist. These initial ill dispositions toward one another, blooming from a lackluster first impression, are further reinforced by their seemingly clashing personalities. Furthermore, the Wickham debacle only complicates matters. Indeed, it further feeds into Lizzie's growing dislike of a Mr. Darcy, whose temperament she stubbornly remains critical and wary of, failing to recognize how closely it resembles her own in certain respects. From their initial encounter at the Meryton Ball in October 1811, one can note not only their difference in status, but also their apparent divergence in temperaments. Indeed, Darcy is introduced to viewers and Lizzie alike at Hertfordshire. Arriving Cullen's family style, with the Bingley siblings flanking him, he is seen adorning an air of disinterest, if not arrogance, in the eyes of some. The room comes to a still as guests, noticing their presence, acknowledge their arrival, deferring to them given their differential status, while a fleeting unease settles over the gathering. It is at that exact moment when Elizabeth Bennet lets a light laugh slip, seemingly amused by what reads as Darcy's ridiculously self-important and rather stiff appearance. Here, the audience, much like Darcy, is made privy to this Bennet sister's more carefree disposition, which, not unlike Mr. Bingley, serves as a foil to Darcy's more reserved and closed-off demeanor. As the lively chaos of the ball resumes, this first encounter, though seemingly inconsequential, appears to be the first spark of Darcy's reticence to acknowledge his rather evident attraction to her, a fascination hinted at by the slight double-take he allows himself, composed as he may be, upon first noticing her in the crowd. Despite this, his circumstances, some may even say his pride, breed a certain hesitation on Darcy's part. This is aptly illustrated in what he confesses to Bingley concerning Lizzie, when, in true avoidant fashion, he qualifies her as merely, quote, tolerable rather than agreeable, as previously suggested by his friend, singling out her older sister Jane as the only truly pretty young woman in the melee.
I've never seen so many pretty girls in my life, but her sister Elizabeth is very agreeable.
She's not handsome enough to tempt me.
This comment, which Elizabeth of course overhears, only exacerbates her growing distaste of the man. Nor is it helped by Darcy's standoffishness upon being introduced to the Bennets by Mr. Lucas. His rigidity when Lizzie attempts to engage him in conversation, perhaps even draw him into joining the dance, further entrenches her already lukewarm impression into something far less charitable. That being said, such an effort does not come naturally to Darcy, whose reserved and guarded disposition renders him far less inclined to initiate or sustain such exchanges. However, this does little to dispel the impression his conduct leaves. As such, it becomes clear that this poor first impression, combined with Darcy's timidity and apparent haughtiness, might, at first glance, easily mark him as a rather unpleasant person to be around. He comes off as almost devoid of charm, or at least of any willingness to be agreeable. By that point in the movie, nothing suggests that he might one day come to occupy such a significant place in Elizabeth's heart, least of all as anything resembling an ideal companion, much less a romantic one. Why then does everyone seem so intent on finding their Mr. Darcy? What makes this seemingly unapproachable character an undisputed favorite of nearly every viewer? If he is, as Elizabeth qualifies him at Meryton, so miserable, so frustratingly disagreeable, how then has he remained such a beloved character since first gracing Austen's pages? Indeed, time and time again, he is praised as the quintessential gentleman, the ultimate green flag, embodying qualities that many swoon over. To understand that, one must first consider the sequence of events leading up to Darcy's arrival at the Meryton Ball, events which, when coupled with a slight insight into his character, reveal a much more nuanced portrait of Pemberley's owner. Elizabeth and Darcy met in October 1811. Before this, however, Darcy had a lot on his plate, to say the least. Indeed, it had by then only been a few months since he'd had to step in to stop his beloved sister Georgiana from eloping with Mr. Wickham, who, upon learning of her sizable £30,000 inheritance, attempted to secure it through marriage. George Wickham, who grew up with the Darcys given his father's role as Mr. Darcy Sr.'s steward, cast aside any semblance of loyalty after the latter's death. Having spent much of his youth at Pemberley, Wickham enjoyed a close familiarity with the Darcy patriarch and was, according to his own pernicious account, believed to be a particular favourite of the late gentleman.
His father, well, he loved me better and Darcy couldn't stand it.
Consequently, he was bestowed as Mr. Darcy's godson, a quote-unquote inheritance which consisted of £1,000 and a comfortable, respectable, and relatively tranquil clerical life. This was promptly refused by Wickham, who instead requested a higher sum, claiming that the original £1,000 was too meagre to support him. Under the guise of an aspiration to pursue legal studies and follow in his father's footsteps, he managed to convince Mr. Darcy to agree to his request. Having thus given up on his claim to the rectory and the accompanying clerical life, Wickham gambles his newfound fortune away before crawling back to Darcy to demand the same church living he had previously relinquished, now claiming that he was no longer interested in the study of law, a pursuit he now deemed to be too unprofitable. Unfortunately for the lieutenant, he is met with an unwavering Darcy who, aware of his childhood companion's reckless life of idleness and dissipation, squarely rejects his incessant requests. Not content after having squandered his own portion of the inheritance and equally blinded by palpable gnawing resentment for Darcy, our dear pioneer and gold digger turns his greedy eye to Georgiana's fortune, allowing a malicious scheme to germinate in that depraved, rotten mind of his. The young girl, who until then had not been acquainted with any sort of romantic love and therefore lacked any frame of reference by which to judge such feelings, falls victim, through no fault of her own, to both his schemes and her own naivete. Persuaded by Wickham that she is indeed in love with him, she is ultimately induced to consent to the proposed elopement.
He came back to see us last summer, at which point he declared passionate love for my sister. She is to inherit £30,000.
Had he been successful, Wickham would have, as Georgiana's husband, gained complete control over her fortune and been free to dispose of it as he wished. And given his habitual financial fickleness and the resulting mounting debts, poor Georgiana would likely have been left destitute had it not been for her brother's intervention. With that in mind, it is no wonder that Mr. Darcy holds such vitriol for Wickham, whose presence he despises so much that he can scarcely bear to look at him when they first encounter each other again at Hertfordshire. It is, additionally, unsurprising that Darcy, who already seems to be much more reserved than Bingley, is not in the most sociable of moods when he arrives in Hertfordshire and meets Lizzie. After all, even outside of the aforementioned circumstances, he seems to be there only to accompany his good friend and is more than happy to let the latter take the lead in conversations when they are in social settings together. Speaking of Darcy's personality, it is crucial to finally delve into those traits of his that leave such a bad taste in Elizabeth's mouth prior to Lydia Gate. Let us first begin with his rather reserved and awkward disposition. Both traits breed a series of mounting misunderstandings between him and Lizzie, resulting in the latter's growing distaste for him before she becomes truly acquainted with his character. This awkwardness, obviously exacerbated by a degree of nervousness, is particularly evident during his visit to the Collins residence shortly before his confession.
Mr. Darcy.
Good day, Miss Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure.
As such, to say that Mr. Darcy is awkward would be an understatement. Throughout the movie, we see the poor man seemingly beside himself whenever in proximity to Elizabeth. This maladresse causes those not acquainted with him to view him as haughty and self-important, as is the case with Miss Bennet. Frustratingly, what longtime readers and viewers know to be timidity in Darcy can only be recognized as such by Elizabeth once she comes to truly know him, something made rather difficult indeed by Darcy's own reluctance to open himself up to others. This is again perfectly exemplified in the book, as the man himself admits that he is, quote, ill-qualified to recommend himself to strangers. It is precisely this aspect of his character which has led many to interpret Darcy as perhaps being somewhere on the spectrum, as he displays several traits that may align with such a reading. Once again, however, as I stated throughout my 500 Days of Summer video, I have absolutely no qualifications when it comes to such matters, and so you should take what I say with a Red Sea level of salt. That being said, I do find the interpretation rather interesting and can certainly understand why some may reach it, particularly when looking at moments from the book. For example, Darcy himself admits that he, quote, certainly does not have the talent which some people possess of conversing easily with those he has never seen before. Now, this is something I share with him, and thus it could be dismissed as him being simply more introverted. But he continues, revealing that he, quote, cannot catch others' tone of conversation or appear interested in their concerns, as he often sees done by others. This former trait in particular is one of the more commonly recognizable in individuals on the spectrum. His difficulty in conversing with others and tendency to miss social cues are evident early on, most notably in his silence when being introduced to the Bennets by Mr. Lucas. His characteristic frankness and directness further contribute to this impression, as seen both in his confession and in the harsh, though not entirely untrue, remarks he makes to Elizabeth.
I suppose you suspect that his fortune had some
No,
bearing
I
on
wouldn't
the
be your
matter.
sister the dishonoured. No, there was, however, I have to admit, the matter of your family. It was the lack of propriety shown by your mother, your 3 younger sisters, even on occasion your father.
All of this, unfortunately for him, creates the ideal conditions under which misunderstandings flourish, thus further exacerbating Lizzie's initial distrust of him and her prejudice against him. Furthermore, his tendency to hold grudges, though in the case of Wickham quite reasonably so, only serves to push Elizabeth further toward siding with the latter, whose outward charm and easy manners contrast greatly with Darcy's sternness. It is during her stay at Netherfield, while tending to her ill sister, that Lizzie is made fully aware that Mr. Darcy's resentment is every bit as formidable as his loyalty. And it is precisely this aspect of his character which, in my view, inspire in Elizabeth equal parts of distaste and anxiety. Anxiety because, after learning of all that he has done for her and her family, Elizabeth is overtaken by regret and grief, convinced that her earlier bias, one she assumes to be reciprocated, leaves little room for forgiveness on his part. Elizabeth, recalling Darcy's assertion that his good opinion once lost is lost forever, extends this principle to his feelings for her, believing that, having once rejected him so decisively, he would never forgive her nor return to her. When it comes to her residual dislike of Darcy, it stems in part from Elizabeth's belief that his resentment toward Wickham is likely unfounded, at least before she discovers the latter's indiscretions with Georgiana. To Lizzie, Wickham's account of his strained relationship with Darcy appears to be rooted primarily in the latter's pride. To Lizzie, Wickham, whom she does not truly know, just as she does not know Darcy, but whose charm and happy manners easily win her favor, becomes a subject of her good opinion and admiration. And as such, it is easy for her to slip into this arbitrary black and white categorization of the two men given her initial encounters with each.
Yours, I believe. Shall we all look for some ribbon together?
How good of you to come.
So which of the painted peacocks is our Mr. Bingley?
Well, he's on the right.
And the person with the quizzical brow?
That is his good friend, Mr. Darcy.
Throughout the movie, we witness both subtle and overt instances of yearning and devotion, particularly within Lizzie and Darcy's actions. Rather than relying solely on grand declarations, Pride and Prejudice often communicates affection through restraint and unspoken attention. This is best expressed at Netherfield. Darcy, who usually seems to be quite in control of his emotions, loses his grip on them when Lizzie visits Jane. As her arrival is announced, the viewer's attention remains on the male protagonist's reaction. His abruptness when rising to greet Lizzie stands out.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
While he lingers upright in an awkward silence, at a loss for words given his surprise at seeing Elizabeth at Netherfield, the extent of her effect on him becomes readily apparent. The director, Joe Wright, does an incredible job at conveying the growing attraction between the pair without relying on overt physical displays of affection, thereby doing justice to Austen's pen. This is perhaps best illustrated in the, quote, accomplished woman conversation. While at first glance it may seem, as it does to Lizzie, that Darcy is partaking in a certain criticism of most women, his interest in her is once again brought to the fore during this conversation.
Well, I think it's amazing you young ladies have the patience to be so accomplished.
I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen women in all my acquaintance that are truly accomplished.
She must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages.
And of course she must improve her mind by extensive reading.
Unlike the many previously mentioned accomplishments, in which Elizabeth neither particularly excels nor appears to have even been trained for, reading is one of, if not the most defining aspects of our protagonist's character. Indeed, Kiera Knightley's very first scene portrays Lizzie walking while reading First Impressions, Pride and Prejudice's original title. As such, Darcy's comment reads less like a half-hearted addition to the conversation with Miss Bingley and more like an indication of the particular qualities he himself values and perhaps already recognizes in Lizzie, as evidenced by the quick glance he casts her before commenting. Unfortunately for Darcy, unlike Miss Bingley, who seems intent on gaining his affections, Lizzie, an avid reader as we've established, loudly slams her book shut, not only to challenge his point and effectively dismiss the notion that he is justified in holding others to such standards, but also to signal that she is not the sort of woman he holds in such esteem. Of course, I cannot talk about how well Pride and Prejudice does the whole yearning thing without mentioning its most recognizable scene, the hand flags. As mentioned in my Emma video, what makes this scene what it is to so many, including the characters themselves, flaws is, in my opinion, the direct physical contact and its uncharacteristic nature. Indeed, at the time, it seems that two young, unmarried individuals would be expected to maintain a certain barrier between one another. This means that when assisting a young lady into a carriage, as Darcy does, it would, I believe, have been customary for at least one of them, if not both, to wear gloves to maintain said boundary. Here, unlike Bingley and Jane, who are seen respecting this convention as Jane's hand is gloved, the same cannot be said for Lizzie and Darcy. Finally, Darcy's hasty departure after helping her up, in contrast to Bingley's lingering near the carriage, stands as a testament not to the degree of affection each of them has for their respective Bennet sister, but rather as an example of the different ways in which they each react to said attraction. While Bingley's is quite overt and open, Darcy's is awkward and restrained, barely noticeable in his expression, but plainly displayed in his hand. The aforementioned displays of attraction and care, though certainly a large part of the story's appeal, are not what make Pride and Prejudice the paragon in Yearning that it is, in my humble opinion. Rather, it is the growth both protagonists, especially Mr. Darcy, undergo which truly sets it apart. If you were to ask any of my friends, you would quickly learn that I am not particularly well versed in all things relationships. One thing I do, however, keep hearing is that communication is key. While I agree that it is a crucial component of any lasting relationship, if that is all there is, things are bound to crumble. Words without the intentionality, compassion, consideration, respect, and actions to support them ring hollow. What makes Darcy such an endearing and admirable partner lies precisely in this understanding. He is not beloved because he is faultless. We have spent the last section outlining those very flaws from Elizabeth's perspective, but rather because of his willingness to make things right, coupled with the concrete actions he takes to do so. His growth is not confined to words of apology, unfulfilled promises, or declarations of affection. It manifests itself in a sincere effort to confront his shortcomings and become better than he was before. Elizabeth's main grievance against Darcy, other than the aforementioned, pertains not only to his role in separating Jane and Bingley, but also to his seeming lack of remorse in doing so. Given the quote serenity of Jane's countenance and air, Darcy, guided not by mere cruelty, but rather by an impartial conviction of her disinterest, makes his objections clear.
Do you think that anything might tempt me to accept a man who has ruined, perhaps forever, the happiness of a most beloved sister? How could you do it?
Because I believed your sister indifferent.
Indifferent?
I watched them most carefully and realized his attachment was deeper than hers.
That's because she's shy.
I did it for his own good.
My sister hardly shows her true feelings to me.
In addition to Jane's apparent disinterest in Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy also opposes their union due to the perceived lack of propriety displayed by the Bennet family at the Netherfield ball. Indeed, throughout the assembly, the Bennets can be seen at times forgetting themselves in the presence of good society. From Mary hogging the piano to Lydia and Kitty fawning over the officers, and Mrs. Bennet dropping what appears to be some sort of yogurt on another attendee in addition to her unseemly manner of sitting, Mr. Darcy clearly disapproves of it all. Thus, with that in mind, Elizabeth, whom we know adores her sister, dare I say as much as Darcy adores his own, is more than justified, in my humble opinion, to be irate with him and even refuse him in such a seemingly harsh manner in Kent. Okay, so this next segment might get me yelled at in the comments, but honestly, I think it's worth it. I must admit that I am absolutely appalled at the gall, the nerve of Mr. Darcy to confess to her after all that he has done. Of course, in his mind, what he did was justified and done in the service of a friend, but given the tenderness and devotion he has for his own sister, whom, might I add, is equally reserved in the book, much like Jane, and his own similarly timid nature, how he could even imagine that Elizabeth would accept his proposal is genuinely beyond me. To add to this, the harshness with which he lays out his reasoning for separating the two lovers, in which he effectively insults Elizabeth and her entire family by referencing both their inferior status and lack of propriety, makes her refusal completely unsurprising and, I must admit, rather satisfying. Of course, none of what he says regarding the Bennets or their status is untrue, but this very character of his leads him to put his foot in his mouth, effectively alienating the very woman he claims to love. Not only did he insult her, he did so in the opening line of his confession, stating that he has ignored everything that might have rendered her inadequate for him because of his ardent affection for her.
I have struggled in vain and I can bear it no longer. I have fought against my better judgment, my family's expectation, the inferiority of your birth, my rank, and I am willing to put them aside and ask you to end my agony.
And to add insult to injury, Darcy seems genuinely taken aback by Elizabeth's response, as if the possibility of her refusing him had never even crossed his mind. And why would it? He is a rich and handsome young man with a noble mother and a respectable name. How could someone of inferior birth ever refuse him?
Please do me the honor of accepting my hand.
Sir, I appreciate the struggle you have been through, and I am very sorry to have caused you pain.
Is this your reply?
Yes, sir.
Are you laughing at me?
No.
Are you rejecting me?
I'm sure that the feelings which, as you've told me, have hindered your regard will help you in overcoming it.
Indeed, it is, in addition to his choice of words and his, quote, sense of her inferiority, of its being a degradation, this blind confidence, this arrogance of his that truly drives Elizabeth to the point of losing all compassion for him in anger.
Could you expect me to rejoice in the inferiority of your circumstances?
And those are the words of a gentleman.
And it is that last sentence and her conviction when telling him that he is the absolute last man on earth she would be prevailed upon to marry, which, in my opinion, sparks the fire of Darcy's transformation. Now, I must preface the following section with a slight disclaimer. I'm not suggesting in the following that you should change yourself for someone else. Rather, the point is that the right people often prompt us to grow, not by demanding it, but rather by revealing things about ourselves, whether good or bad, that we may not have seen clearly otherwise. The emphasis, however, should always remain on self-improvement for its own sake. Darcy does not become better solely for Elizabeth, nor does Elizabeth correct her prejudice for Darcy. Both are simply forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and choose to act upon them. With that being said, Darcy, having had his pride thoroughly bruised by Elizabeth's refusal and critique, undergoes a slight metamorphosis. This transformation is most clearly illustrated in his role during Lydiagate. To understand the magnitude of Darcy's atonement and why it constitutes an adequate repentance for his past actions, we must first examine the significance of Lydiagate itself. As you may be aware, during that time period, a woman's, quote, virtue, her reputation, was among her greatest assets. Indeed, as much as I disdain this mentality, it would be disingenuous not to state the obvious. At a time when women had virtually no real freedom, especially when it came to their finances and independence, they had to rely on other things, including their intellect, their status, and more specifically, their reputation, to hopefully lead a comfortable life. This is even more so the case in a family such as the Bennets, where one sister's successes, or in this case, shortcomings, would inevitably have dire consequences for the others. The gravity of the situation can perhaps best be grasped through the letter Mr. Collins sends to Mr. Bennet after learning of Lydia's actions. Horrified by the scandal, the former unequivocally reprimands his cousin, going as far as to confidently assert that her death would have been less grievous than her being ruined and consequently sullying her father's name and, by extension, her sister's reputations and prospects. Indeed, Mr. Collins writes the following: "My dear sir, I feel myself called upon by our relationship and my situation in life to condole with you on the grievous affliction you are now suffering under. Be assured, my dear sir, that Mrs. Collins and myself sincerely sympathize with you and all your respectable family in your present distress, which must be of the bitterest kind. No arguments shall be wanting on my part that can alleviate so severe a misfortune, or that may comfort you under a circumstance that must be of all others the most afflicting to a parent's mind. The death of your daughter would have been a blessing in comparison of this. They agree with me in apprehending that this false step in one daughter will be injurious to the fortunes of all the others. Having considered all of this, we must now turn to Darcy's role in resolving the disaster that is Lydia's marriage. As previously established, Lydia's fight with Wickham is not merely an embarrassing scandal, but a catastrophe capable of jeopardizing the reputations and marriage prospects of every Bennet sister.
Now, why did the Forsters let her out of their sight?
And now she's ruined.
You're all ruined. Who will take you now with a fallen sister?
Yet when informed of the situation, Darcy does not stand idly by or give Elizabeth up entirely. Rather, he immediately sets about doing what no one else has either the means nor the goodness to accomplish. It is Darcy who tracks down Lydia and Wickham. It is Darcy who settles Wickham's debts. It is Darcy who purchases him a commission and provides the financial incentives necessary to secure a marriage between the pair. And most importantly, it is Darcy, not Mr. Gardiner, who ultimately rescues the Bennets from disaster. In other words, Darcy not only saves Lydia and the Bennet's reputation, but willingly allows another man to receive the praise for doing so. The obvious question then is why? Part of it lies in Darcy's lingering sense of responsibility regarding Wickham. Having concealed Wickham's true character for years in order to protect Georgiana, Darcy recognizes that his silence enabled the officer to continue deceiving others. He explicitly acknowledges this responsibility, writing, "But whatever may be the sentiments which Mr. Wickham has created, a suspicion of their nature shall not prevent me from unfolding his real character character. It adds even another motive. That other motive is undoubtedly Elizabeth herself, or rather her affections. Darcy wishes to spare her from Wickham's manipulation and to correct the false impression she has of him. That the wish of giving happiness to you might add force to the other inducements which led me on, I shall not attempt to deny. But your family owe me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. This confession is particularly touching because Darcy never intended Elizabeth to learn of his involvement at all. He neither seeks gratitude nor expects his action to improve his standing with her. On the contrary, he goes out of his way to ensure the entire affair remains secret. Had Lydia not revealed the truth, Elizabeth may never have discovered Darcy's role in the matter. This, perhaps more than anything else, demonstrates the extent of Darcy's transformation. Earlier on, he is a man whose pride repeatedly interferes with his judgment, and whose actions, however well-intentioned, are often guided by a belief that he knows best. Here, however, he acts with no expectation of reward, recognition, or even forgiveness. He intervenes because he feels responsible for Wickham's conduct, because Elizabeth's happiness matters to him, and because it is simply the right thing to do. If Darcy's disastrous first proposal represents the culmination of his flaws, then Lydia Gate represents the culmination of his growth. His repentance is not expressed through grand declarations, but through concrete action. Concurrently, it is Darcy's letter following the first proposal, coupled with the profound transformation he undergoes thereafter, that ignites a sense of remorse in Elizabeth, a remorse that lingers until the second proposal and ultimately forces her to confront the uncomfortable possibility that she has misjudged him as thoroughly as he once did her. In the book, the shift comes immediately after reading the letter. Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind. But vanity, not love, has been my folly. Pleased with the preference of one and offended by the neglect of the other, on the very beginning of our acquaintance, I have courted prepossession and ignorance and driven reason away, where either were concerned. Till this moment, I never knew myself. For perhaps the first time in the novel, Elizabeth turns her judgment inward. Throughout the story, she has taken pride in her ability to read people accurately, yet she is forced to acknowledge that her prejudice against Darcy and her favorable opinion of Wickham were not born of reason but of wounded vanity. More importantly, however, this revelation does not immediately transform her feelings into a sudden undying love for Darcy. Austen avoids the simplistic conclusion that realizing she was wrong means she ought to accept Darcy's proposal. Indeed, even as Elizabeth's opinion of him begins to change, she remains convinced that she was right to refuse him. When she considered how unjustly she had condemned and upbraided him, her anger was turned against herself, and his disappointed feelings became the object of compassion. His attachment excited gratitude, his general character respect. But she could not approve him, nor could she for a moment repent her refusal, or feel the slightest inclination ever to see him again. Elizabeth can recognize her own errors without abandoning her principles. Darcy's feelings may deserve compassion, but that does not erase the arrogance and insensitivity of his proposal, nor can it undo Jane's sorrow. One may sympathize with him while still understanding why she rejected him. Likewise, she cannot entirely dismiss his criticism of her family. When she reaches the section of the letter concerning Jane and Bingley, Elizabeth is forced to admit that Darcy's observations, however grievous to Jane, were not wholly unfounded, as her sister's feelings, though fervent, were little displayed.
I think he likes her very much.
But does she like him? There are few of us who are secure enough to be really in love without proper encouragement.
But she's just shy and modest.
He does not know her character as we do.
Darcy could have expressed this with greater tact. Being blunt does not excuse knowingly wounding someone, and the language he employs remains unnecessarily unkind. Yet Elizabeth's discomfort stems precisely from the fact that she recognizes the truth behind at least some of his words. The behavior of her mother, younger sisters, and even Mr. Bennet at Netherfield had embarrassed her long before Darcy ever put those thoughts into words.
Clearly my family are having a competition to see who can expose themselves to the most ridicule.
Mr. Bingley, is it true that you have promised to hold a ball here at Netherfield?
A ball?
You could invite the militia. They're excellent company.
Oh, do hold a ball, Kitty.
From this point onward, Elizabeth's feelings towards Darcy begin to evolve in ways she struggles to understand. By the time she encounters him again at Pemberley, she certainly does not hate him. What replaces it is gratitude, admiration, respect, and growing affection. Elizabeth finds herself deeply moved not merely by the fact that Darcy once loved her, but by the possibility that he might still do so despite the severity of her rejection. It was gratitude. Gratitude not merely for having once loved her, but for loving her still well enough to forgive all the petulance and acrimony ignominy of her manner in rejecting him, which remains with her. Her visit to Pemberley only deepens these reflections. Confronted with Darcy's transformed character, she is astonished by his, quote, strikingly altered behavior. Gone is the proud, aloof gentleman of Meryton. In his place stands a man eager to welcome her relatives, attentive to her comfort, and noticeably gentler in manner. The man who once seemingly looked down on her family is now actively seeking the acquaintance of those very relations. The criticisms Elizabeth leveled at him during her rejection, especially that line questioning his gentility, have clearly not fallen on deaf ears as, quote, in all that he said, she heard an accent so far removed from hauteur or disdain of his companions, as convinced her that the improvement of manners which she had yesterday witnessed had at least outlived one day. Never had she seen him so desirous to please, so free from self-consequence or unbending reserve as now, when no importance could result from the success of his endeavours. Darcy behaved this way despite having every reason to believe that he has no chance of winning Elizabeth's affection. His transformation, therefore, cannot be dismissed as an attempt to secure her favor. He is simply striving to become a better man, which only heightens Elizabeth's regret. By then, Elizabeth's transformation mirrors Darcy's own. Both have recognized their faults, both have endeavored to correct them, and both now believe themselves unlikely to receive the affection they desire. Having spent so much of the story misunderstanding one another, it is only fitting that Darcy and Elizabeth's second proposal comes after both have undergone the necessary introspection to overcome their respective flaws. Unlike the first proposal, which is characterized by wounded pride, frustration, and mutual resentment, the second is built upon humility, respect, and a far deeper understanding of one another. For the first time, Lizzie can thank Darcy for everything he has done for Lydia, Jane, and the rest of her family.
After what you have done for Lydia, and I suspect for Jane also, it is I who should be making amends.
The gratitude she has carried since discovering the truth can finally be expressed out loud. Likewise, Darcy is no longer speaking as a man attempting to overcome his own feelings of superiority, but as one who has listened, reflected, and ultimately changed. As for the proposal itself, I confess I have very little to add beyond the obvious observation that it is perfect. After hundreds of pages of yearning, misunderstandings, growth, regret, and self-reflection, there is something immensely gratifying about watching two people finally say what both have long wanted to hear. Perhaps what makes the scene especially moving is that neither Darcy nor Elizabeth enters it with any certainty of success. For a considerable portion of the novel, each has convinced themselves that the opportunity has passed forever, and then, all at once, it has not.
If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes have not changed, but one word from you will silence me forever.
The proposal itself may conclude Darcy and Elizabeth's romantic journey, but one final scene remains worth mentioning, the couple asking for Mr. Bennet's blessing. The conversation is touching in both the novel and the film, but the latter elevates it even further through Donald Sutherland's performance. The relief, pride, and happiness visible on his face when he realizes that Elizabeth truly loves Darcy never fails to move me. This is the daughter whose intelligence and independence make her unlikely to settle for a marriage of convenience, and now she stands before him, engaged to a man who has proven himself honorable, devoted, and worthy. The contrast with Lydia's marriage is impossible to ignore. Mr. Bennet was forced to watch his youngest enter a union founded upon recklessness, manipulation, and uncertainty. Now he is given the reassurance of seeing another enter a marriage built upon mutual respect, genuine affection, and hard-won love. For a father of the time, there can be few greater comforts than knowing that his child is to be well loved, even beyond the confines of his own heart.
You really do love him, don't you?
Very much.
I cannot believe that anyone can deserve you. It seems I am overruled. So, I heartily give my consent. I could not have parted with you, my Lizzie, to anyone less worthy.
And so we find ourselves back to my earlier disclaimer. I do not think the appeal of Pride and Prejudice lies in the fantasy of finding a perfect partner. If anything, Austen goes out of her way to show us that neither of her protagonists is perfect. Darcy is prideful, awkward, overly reserved, and at times remarkably insensitive. Elizabeth is intelligent and perceptive, yet still allows wounded vanity, first impressions, and prejudice to cloud her judgment. What makes their stories so compelling to me is not that they are flawless, but that they are willing to acknowledge when they are wrong. Darcy listens to Elizabeth's criticisms and takes them seriously. Elizabeth reads Darcy's letter and, despite how painful it is, forces herself to confront her own shortcomings. Neither allows pride to prevent self-reflection. Additionally, despite the 200 and some years that separate Elizabeth Bennet from us, Jo Wright somehow makes some of their experiences relatable to our own. For example, the scene of Darcy helping Bingley rehearse for his proposal never fails to make me laugh because, despite the Regency costumes and grand estates, it feels so recognizably human. These moments moments endure because we recognize ourselves within these characters. No matter the century, everyone becomes at least a little foolish when in love. Most people have rehearsed conversations in advance only for everything to go disastrously off script. Most have felt embarrassed after being caught caring a little too much. Most have tried to suppress their feelings, as Jane does, to spare themselves potential heartbreak. Most have had a friend insist that they are being ridiculous and remind them that anyone would be lucky to have them. The circumstances may change, but the emotions rarely do. All of this is portrayed beautifully in the film's final scene. There sits Darcy, at long last free from the misunderstandings, insecurities, and mistakes that have haunted him throughout the story. Not because he is wealthy, not because he is handsome, not even because he finally gets the girl, but because he and Mrs. Darcy have both done the difficult work of, quote, bettering themselves and have found someone who sees, understands, and loves them all the more for it. There is something deeply comforting in Austen's conclusion. We will all make mistakes. We will all misjudge people. We will all, at one point or another, be guilty of a little pride and a little prejudice. But what matters is what we do to remedy our faults. For if the Darcys teach us anything, it is that growth is possible, that first impressions need not be final, and that perhaps all of us deserve the chance to be, in our own way, completely, perfectly, and incandescently happy in love.
What shall I call you when I'm cross? Mrs. Darcy?
No. You may only call me Mrs. Darcy when you are completely and perfectly and incandescently happy.